Welcome. There we are. We're here live, HR Huddle, Monday afternoon, last week of September. Welcome, Jen. How are you?
I'm good, Tamara. Tamara and I were just cracking up before this and had to stop laughing so we could start this. So I think that's a perfect way to start HR Huddle.
I think it is too. And in Monday afternoon, and we know volume is high, and we're just going to the next thing. And so we're here, and we thought today. I was at a wedding this weekend, and Saturday was National Daughters Day, and so we both Jen and I have adult daughters, and Jen has one about to graduate from high school. And so we thought we would talk today about what we need to do to further elevate women in the profession, but I think in all organizations at work. And we were joking just before, we came on that, women know how to have it all. We're unstoppable. We, can just figure out, how do we juggle all of these things? And yet, we are still struggling with how do we have more women in leadership positions, more women in partnership or C-suite roles. I think in the public accounting profession, it's about 20% still. We've been hovering like right around that number. Maybe it's 21 right now of women that are partners, yet over 50% of college graduates are women, and over 50% of our employees are women. So we're still missing something, and there is still a glass ceiling, where women are not making as much compared to men when you compare the dollar for dollar for the same roles, and just other like ceilings and walls almost that women hit. And so we thought we would just maybe tackle a few of those and talk about what can we do to further elevate women in our business, in our profession, in our lives, and see what we can do to maybe take down some of those roadblocks.
Tamara, I think our perspective for this will be mostly like as members of HR, as members of management versus as women in the workplace, although I'm sure we'll touch on a few things we as individuals can do. But we really want to empower women, and what we ultimately want is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want our female participants in our firms to have as much potential for success and growth and leadership as our male folks do, and just like equality, if we could get there. And clearly the statistics show with somewhere around, let's say, 23% of firm partners being female. And I think that number is lower if we were to actually look for equity partnership. When we have roughly 50-50 male-female in the profession, perhaps a slight edge to female these days passing the exams. Why aren't women getting to the partnership ranks, and what are the things that possibly hold them back? So Tamara and I thought we'd just try to make a little list and say to ourselves and to you, what could we do as members of leadership to try to help with these things? And I'll start by saying, the most obvious one. And that's the one that everybody goes to. This is the go-to one. And I think it's at play, so I think it's valid, but I don't think it has as much pull or play these days as it might have in the past. And I think we have to be careful dismissing all the other ideas that we're going to talk about for this one, because this is what most people will say. And that is, well, women need to take care of things at home. They need to take care of housework and groceries and children and school. And because of that, they are called away, their focus is called away, or they aren't able to put in as much time. In the olden days, when we had an on-premise model where you put in your time physically at the office, and you needed to start early and stay late and work through dinner and work on Saturdays, clearly this was more of an impact, I think, than it is today, where we have, first of all, pandemic remote. That's the first piece. But secondarily, we have, way more flexibility in schedules and in the places that we work from our employers for the most part. But still, that doesn't take away that, like in my household, my husband does have, some home responsibilities, and we're clear about which things he owns and which ones I own. But I do own the success of the children's school. I always did. the interface with the teachers, making sure the homework's done, and their health, all the doctor's appointments, and any of those kinds of things. And when they were little, if they were sick, between the two of us, it was going to probably be me that would try to stay home. Not always 100%, but if I was in town, I was going to try to be near them and not working, or try to work with them with me, because they preferred me. Maybe I was more of, the soft mommy who would make them feel better or something. And maybe that's not the case in most and all families, but the mom does tend to hold a lot of that responsibility. And because of that, if their child is not winning, they're going to stop work and work on getting the child back to health, back to winning at school, back to whatever that is. And I think that, now that we have more flexibility, this might be less of an issue holding us back. But we've got to make sure firms support flexibility. And when we go back to the office, we can't go back to the office. It has to be one size fits one. It has to be complete flex, work where you can get the work done, where you will be productive at the hours that work for you, so that you can win at home and win at work. And if we have that, and we really have that for men and women,
Right.
this will no longer be a barrier that we speak about, I don't think.
Right. And I think that's a good point, that it is for men and women. So you could listen to this like, well, men want some of these things too. And we know that's the case. But when you really go and dig deep, you do find out the women do carry the majority of the responsibility. Or, when it, cut to the chase, who's going to be responsible for it? It's often the women. And I think that points to this winning at home and winning at work. Another strategy is that we really need to make sure we have good role models, and both in our profession, in our firms, just as working women, that, have juggled family, have juggled outside commitments, have juggled raising the kids and progressing in their careers. And that can look a lot of different ways. And I think that's one of the things that we need to maybe have women do, is tell their story, share how they, made it happen. And how I did it doesn't mean that's how Jen's going to do it, or how Emily's doing it, or how Renee's doing it, but some combination in there that we can say, how do we have it all? How do we each need to win at work and win at home? And then what kind of structures do we need to have in place? And it's probably letting go of some of those stereotypes of the way it used to be. And we don't really have as many stay at home moms. And I might have had that, as some of the partners that are retiring, they've always had, somebody that stayed at home and managed all of that. And we don't have that today. And so you look around and it's like, how do we make this work? How do we make that happen? And when they don't see a role model, they can make up in their own mind, whether it's valid or not. You could argue if it's valid or not, but they're going to make up, I can't do that here. And so we have to tell them and show them and share with them how they can do that there. Talking about that flexibility and, all of those things that Jen, that you just talked about is important too. But I think the stories, from women and how they do it is super important.
Yeah. And holding people up as a success, regardless of their model, I think is important. I know a lot of young women say to me now, when I look at my partners today that are female, they didn't have kids, or they had a full-time nanny, or they will sort of point to those people and say, here's why they're not like me,
right?
And so I can't be like them. And so you want enough diversity in the stories that people can see a glimmer of themselves in those. And of course, if you don't have any women in leadership, that's the first place for us to look. It's hard for me to picture being a female in leadership in your firm if there are none. Once they are there, they need to be transparent. Sometimes we women think we have to kind of give off this like superwoman, persona, where we're like, yes, I did all of these things. And we don't talk about any of the things that were hard, or any of the things that didn't work as well, or some of the concessions we had to make, or compromises. And we don't sort of tell our transparent, authentic story, so it's not relatable to the women. And I discourage us from, I don't know, sugarcoating it or whitewashing it or whatever you want to call it, to make it look like it was easier, because it isn't easy. And but there were there were aspects of it that worked for each of us, and we need to explain what those were and what our formula was. And then some of the trade-offs, because there are those. So I agree, Tamara, the storytelling's super critical. Another one is, let's really look, and this sounds so fundamental, I'm almost embarrassed to say it out loud because we're all going to go, oh, duh. But let's look at what our promotion criteria are. And let's make sure that we haven't built an artificial glass ceiling in our organization around the promotion criteria. And let's be honest about promotion criteria when we're talking about getting women into leadership. Because I think that, like, if you ask Jen and Tamara off camera, you put us in a soundproof booth and you asked us the same question, what are the primary drivers that cause promotion to partner? I know we would answer the same way. We would say, well, if we have to answer for all firms across the US, we'd say chargeable hours or dollars under control, maybe, client book managed, any of that, client hours billable, and then new business developed. So billing and selling. Okay, that's what we would say is the real and true and honest promotion criteria in a lot of firms. And if that's really the truth for your firm, then you have to free up the women in equal numbers to the men to do billing and client work and selling. And you have to make sure they're not saddled with a bunch of administrative responsibilities. They're not the primary people developers and mentors and trainers, and that we don't have them. We women tend to gravitate toward, hey, put me in charge of business process. I'll work on this scheduling process. I can fix it. We like to organize, and not all women do. Don't get me wrong, but we tend to gravitate toward, like, let's run this thing, and I'll help you manage the department. I'll help you manage the people. I'll mentor. I'll develop. And then all of a sudden I find out I'm not really getting promoted at the same level as the people that I'm helping develop their people that they're leveraging off of, because I'm not doing as much billing and selling. And so we have to be transparent, so at least men and women can make intelligent decisions about how they'll spend their time if they want to be promoted to partner. And they can say, well, if billing and selling is what gets it, then that's what I'm going to do. And we just be straight about that mousetrap instead of acting like all jobs are equal, but then in the small room, making the decisions off those two criteria. Now, we would not advocate that, by the way, would we, Tamara? We don't think it should be billing and selling, do we?
No,
just billing and selling.
And if you did, and we all made the decision, fine, if that's how I get promoted, and we're all working on billing and selling, and we see this all the time, who's focusing on the people? And people often, when we look at, path to partner and partner criteria, people development has not been in there. I know it's getting in there more and more. We're encouraging firms to add it. They're like, important, but it's still not always there. And, we need to focus on it. So we have to be careful of that. And I think, we have these unconscious bias, right? That's one place to look. Where do we have these unconscious bias that are occurring? Maybe we've inherited them. They've just always been there, and start kind of inspecting and looking underneath that. And I think another unconscious bias we have is the role of mentors and finding advocates, for women. And unconscious bias isn't, wrong or bad. It's how we're wired. But if we can be aware of it, we can start being intentional to be more inclusive. You started with that diversity, equity and inclusion. And one of the ways we can be more equitable with women, I think, is to say, who are their mentors? Who are we having advocate for them? People are drawn to people that they are familiar with, that they're like. And so it's normal for a male partner to grab a young male manager and go grab a beer on Friday night, or go invite them to a game with a client, and not invite that with the women. I'm going to go back to your first objection, Jen, is, well, I know they've got kids they need to go take care of at night. So it just all gets kind of jumbled right in there, but we have to be careful about that. And stop and say, how do we be more inclusive of women in business development opportunities or in those client meetings, and not just be in the background now, because maybe more women, and I think this is going to be less and less, but traditionally, more women are on different alternate work arrangements or schedules, might require more planning, more intentionality. You could say they're not in the office on Fridays. We're all remote now. It's very easy to grab somebody and join on a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting. I think it's easier to do that now than it was, pre-pandemic. So it's a matter of changing our thinking and our habits in order to do that, but also like I said, be more intentional about how and who we're assigning as mentors and advocates, and getting women the same equal, experience and exposures to different, whether it's, business development opportunities or client opportunities, or, planning meetings, committees, initiatives, things like that.
Yeah, and Tamara, I really think that what you're pointing to here with this bias is it isn't intentional, but
Mhm.
there have been studies done that show that that women tend to get fewer experiential learning opportunities inside organizations that they work in, and because of that, they aren't as exposed to as many relationships and exposed to higher level work before they're at that level. They weren't invited along. And we could make a list of reasons. Tamara suggested one was our assumption that they are tied up after hours and unable to participate. That's an assumption we would make. But there's also other, like, almost awkward issues that come into play here with experiential learning sometimes. Like, I'm going to a conference out of town, and maybe who I really should bring, and I'm gonna use me as the female, but maybe I should bring a young man that hasn't had the opportunity, but that feels awkward to me. So I'm going to invite another female that I have more of an affinity bias toward. I relate to her more. Maybe she's a runner. I'll have more fun running with her in that out of town conference or something. That's an example of sort of using bias and also a little bit of like gender affinity or something. Maybe I would think my husband would be more comfortable if I invited the female as well. And people get super upset when I say something like that. I mean, I don't want us to ever think that way. I mean, my goodness, we're talking about work here and business, and none of this, some of this is not legal. I mean, we should not have these thoughts or act upon them and show these discriminatory things. But if we don't talk about them, if we don't talk about them amongst ourselves, HR and talent people and leaders of firms, and we don't sort of bring them out of the dark into the light and say, sometimes these are the thoughts you're having as you're choosing who to bring along. And maybe we would suggest a more systematic approach to both the assignment of mentors and the assignment of experiences. And that you start keeping track of who's had what kind of experiences and who they've gotten to go with. And that we actually have documentation. Well, we have 3 senior managers, and 2 of them have already been to this conference, but she hasn't. So she goes next, and we keep track of it. And that would keep us from doing this weird, like, preferential thing that we do. And we see it all the time. We see it happen all the time. And we try to call it out when we see it, but it's really holding women back. We believe that it causes women's names to get called less. Now, as we get more women in leadership, you might wonder, will we have men getting fewer experiences if we end up with some sort of, more women than men? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if this is a numbers game or if it's just sort of long held biases. I am not sure, but I do know that if we keep track of it and make it more systematic, and also this the assignment of mentors more systematic, that we say, are our women getting the same mentors or sponsors assigned to them with the same sort of juice or political weight or pull? Are they the same sort of power brokers? Do they sit on the executive committee? Are they on the comp committee? Are they on the board? Are they getting those kind of mentors or not? And we want to make sure there's parity there.
Yeah. And I would say it's probably a combination of both. It's long held biases that we have and a numbers game. And we always have to be paying attention to this as we're evolving it. And I liked your point about if it's in the forefront, I think that's helpful. And you made me think, Jen, if maybe you're sitting here listening, gosh, our firm doesn't have maybe role models, women role models right now, or maybe we have one and that one poor person is always it. As we're starting to grow this, a place to look is there are women's conferences. The AICPA has a great women's conference and events that they hold. I know some state societies do. I know other CPA associations do. There's a whole bunch of great resources and studies and white papers out there, by the way, from the AICPA that I encourage you to go read if you have not. So put women in touch with other women in other firms to say, how can I bring it back here? What steps can we be making here? And by the way, have some men read it too. We're not saying this to, there's always this argument about having women's initiatives and we exclude men, and we say we need men to come along as well so they can hear this message, so they can think about who should the mentors be, and are we assigning people from the board, with parity, across our up and coming next gen leaders, both female and male. And so it's not to exclude the men, but it's to say, how do we start bringing it back here, and how do we share that information? So that's something that you might look at if you haven't really been involved as a firm in some of those areas.
That's awesome.
And in the meantime, have a great, productive week, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Bye.